The detonator felt heavier than it should. Colonel James Hawk Hawkins stood in the council chamber, surrounded by debris and bodies, his weathered hand wrapped around a device that could vaporize 10,000 souls in an instant. Across from him, Empress Lyria Valen knelt in electromagnetic restraints. Her wrist bound the neural resonance band on her arm, pulsing with frantic violet light. Blood trickled from a cut above her eye, but her gaze never wavered from his. Grand Marshal Voss circled them both like a predator, savoring the kill. The ancient Valkyrian warrior's scarred face held no mercy, only the cold certainty of a man who had seen civilizations burn and believed it necessary. The choice is yours, Colonel. Voss gestured toward Lyria with his ceremonial blade, then swept it toward the viewport where Independence Station hung in the black. Her life or 10,000 human lives. Choose. Hawk's thumb rested on the trigger. 40 years since he'd faced a choice like this. 40 years since he'd held life and death in his hands and made the wrong call. The weight of 6 dead pilots pressed against his chest, a phantom pressure that never quite left. His eyes met Lyria's. Through the neural bond, he felt her terror, her rage, her absolute refusal to beg. She would die before she let him sacrifice innocence for her. He'd seen that truth in her memories during the sink, watched a young empress order her own guards to stand down rather than risk civilian casualties during a coup attempt. The band on her wrist flared brighter. 48 hours ago, none of this existed. 48 hours ago, he was just a forgotten maintenance chief waiting to die. The environmental control system of Independence Station had been built in 2062 before the orbit war, before the Mars offensive, before humanity learned that space infrastructure required redundancy, stacked on redundancy. Hawk knew every pipe, every circuit, every pressure valve in Sector 12 because he'd installed half of them himself during the station's expansion. 23 years of service meant he could diagnose a failing compressor by sound alone. The high-pitched whine coming from behind panel J7 told him they had maybe 6 hours before the entire sector choked on its own recycled CO2. Betty run a diagnostic on the backup scrubbers. His voice echoed in the empty maintenance corridor. The station's AI responded instantly, her synthesized voice carrying the warm Texas drawl he'd programmed 15 years ago, modeled after his late wife. Already on it, James. Looks like the molecular sieve is saturated. You'll need to swap it out manually. Of course, because nothing on this station could fail conveniently. Hawk pulled his tool belt tighter and reached for the plasma wrench hanging from his hip. The weight felt familiar, comforting. He carried the same tool through 3 wars and twice as many near-death experiences. Young engineers mocked him for it, preferred their nano-assemblers and remote drones. But a wrench couldn't be hacked, couldn't malfunction when you needed it most. A lesson from Apollo 13, sometimes the old tools are the only tools that work. He popped the panel and squeezed into the maintenance shaft. His joints protested. 68 years of gravity and combat took their toll, but he'd done this dance 10,000 times. The cramped space smelled of recycled air and machine oil, familiar as his own skin. The radio on his belt crackled. "Hawkins, you still down there?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Chen, one of the dozen young hotshots who'd been assigned to his department after washing out of pilot training. "You know we have drones for this, right? Drones don't have 40 years of experience, Chen." Hawk twisted a coupling. Free felt the hiss of escaping pressure. "Besides, somebody's got to teach you kids how things really work. Pretty sure things now includes quantum processors and neural interfaces." "Old man, not fossil fuel era hand tools." Hawk smiled despite himself. The wrench in question had been manufactured in 2038, back when the United States still thought conventional warfare would remain conventional. He'd carried it through the Korean Peninsula during the brief but brutal Pacific skirmish of 2044, kept it through his transition to the Air Force, used it to repair his F-35's landing gear over the Sea of Japan when the starboard hydraulics failed mid-flight. "Call it what you want, kid. This wrench has saved more lives than your entire graduating class." He didn't mention the 6 it hadn't saved. The scrubber came free with a final twist. Hawk pulled himself out of the shaft, already mentally cataloging the replacement parts he'd need from storage. His quarters were only 2 sections away, but he detoured past the memorial wall first. An old habit, one he couldn't quite break. Lieutenant Marcus Hawkins, KIA, Mars Offensive, 2081, his son's name etched in steel alongside 300 other casualties from that disastrous campaign. Hawk's fingers traced the letters worn smooth by years of repetition. Marcus had been 26, fresh out of pilot school, burning with the same idealism Hawk had carried into Korea. The same idealism that got ground into ash when reality hit. You'd be 33 now. Hawk's throat tightened. Probably would have made captain, maybe even commander. The station's intercom chimed, interrupting his thoughts. All personnel be advised, diplomatic delegation from Valkyrian Empire arriving in 30 minutes. Sectors 5 through 9 restricted to essential personnel only. Hawk turned away from the wall. The Valkyrian treaty negotiations had been the talk of the station for weeks. Humanity's first formal alliance with an alien empire, assuming the hardliners on both sides didn't torpedo it first. Rumor had it the Valkyrian Empress herself would be attending, though Hawk gave that about as much credence as he gave most station gossip. He made his way to the storage bay, grabbed the replacement scrubber, and headed back to Sector 12. The corridors were emptier than usual, most personnel either gawking at the arriving delegation or wisely staying clear of the diplomatic circus. Hawk preferred the solitude, less chance of some administrator finding busy work for him. Betty's voice crackled through his earpiece. James, I'm picking up some unusual readings in Sector 7. Might want to take a look after you finish the scrubber. What kind of readings? Thermal signatures. 3 humanoid, but the biomarkers are off. Could be equipment malfunction, but... A scream cut through the station's ambient hum, high-pitched, desperate, echoing from the direction of Sector 7. Hawk's training kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. He dropped the scrubber and ran. The maintenance corridors blurred past. His lungs burned 68-year-old lungs, no matter how well maintained, but his legs remembered how to move. How many times had he sprinted toward Danger Korea, the Mars evacuation, the Titan disaster? Muscle memory didn't care about age. Sector 7's access hatch hung open, emergency lights casting red shadows across the floor. Hawk slowed, pressed himself against the bulkhead, and peered around the corner. 3 figures in adaptive camouflage surrounded a woman backed against the far wall. The attackers moved with predatory precision, their weapons some kind of energy blade Hawk didn't recognize, crackling with blue-white light. The woman fought desperately, but they were toying with her, backing her into a corner with nowhere to run. Hawk's hand found the wrench. His mind cataloged options with the cold efficiency of a veteran who'd been outnumbered before and survived through sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. 3 hostiles, unknown, weapons confined space. No time for backup. No time for planning. Sometimes you just had to swing first and pray later. He moved. The first attacker never saw him coming. Hawk's wrench caught him behind the knee with a crunch of shattered bone. The man dropped screaming. The second spun blade rising, but Hawk was already inside his guard. Elbow to the temple, brutal and efficient. The third hesitated, just for a second, caught between his target and this new threat. That second cost him. Hawk closed the distance, grabbed the man's weapon arm, and used his own momentum to drive him into the bulkhead. The energy blades skittered across the floor. The attacker twisted faster than Hawk expected and landed a kick that sent him sprawling. Pain exploded through his ribs. The attacker lunged, hands reaching for his throat. Hawk's vision narrowed, old training overriding panic. Close Quarter Combat Camp Pendleton 2042. When someone tries to choke you, you break their arms first. He did. The attacker screamed and stumbled back. The third one, the one with the shattered knee, was trying to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood. The woman sagged against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Hawk pushed himself upright, every joint screaming protest. You okay? The woman's hand pressed against a wound in her side, blood seeping between her fingers. Her eyes met his wide with shock and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. When their gazes locked, a device on her wrist began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer barely visible in the emergency lighting. Then it exploded into brilliant violet radiance that filled the corridor like a star going nova. The light burned into Hawk's retinas, into his skull, into some part of him he hadn't known existed. Heat flooded through his nervous system, not painful but overwhelming, like touching a live wire and discovering electricity could feel like coming home. The woman gasped. Her body arched, every muscle going rigid. The device on her wrist, some kind of band or bracelet, pulsed with that impossible light, growing brighter with each heartbeat. What the hell? Hawk reached for her instinctively, and the moment his fingers brushed her arm, The world tilted sideways. Images crashed through his mind. A palace of crystal and shadow. A child standing alone in a throne room larger than any building Hawk had ever seen. Pressure suffocating and absolute, the weight of billions of lives pressing down on small shoulders. Fear, loneliness so profound it felt like drowning. And beneath it all, a desperate hunger for connection, for understanding, for someone who could see past the crown and the ceremony to the person underneath. Not his memories, hers. Hawk jerked back, but the connection had already solidified. The light from her wrist began to fade, settling into a steady pulse that matched his own heartbeat. The woman stared at him, her violet eyes alien eyes, he realized distantly filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. Thou art, her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, formal and archaic. Who art thou? Hawk's throat felt dry. Colonel James Hawkins, United States Air Force. Retired. His hand still tingled where he'd touched her. I'm maintenance chief on this station. And you are, the woman straightened despite her wound, and something in her bearing shifted. Authority radiated from her like heat from a furnace, transforming her from victim to sovereign in the space of a breath. I am Lyria Valen, Empress of the Valkyrian Empire. Hawk's stomach dropped. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. The band on her wrist pulsed again brighter. Lyria stared at it, then at him. Her expression cycling through disbelief, fear, and something that might have been hope. The neural resonance band. Her fingers traced the device reverently. For 245 years, I have worn this. For 245 years, it has remained dark. And now it burns for thee. A human, a male approaching his elder years. Elder Hawk bristled despite the surreal circumstances. I'm 68. I can still kick ass just fine, as those three can attest. Lyria glanced at the groaning attackers, then back to Hawk. Her lips quirked in something that might have been a smile if not for the blood loss making her sway. So I witnessed, but the band, it should not be possible. Thou art not Valkyrian. Thou lackest the genetic markers, the neural compatibility, what is that thing? Hawk cut her off, gesturing at the glowing bracelet. And why did it light up like a Christmas tree when we touched? It is a diagnostic tool, ancient beyond reckoning. It measures compatibility across genetic, neural, and spiritual dimensions. Lyria's voice grew quieter, almost reverent. In our tongue, we call it the soul knot. When two beings are perfectly matched, destined, some say the band reveals the truth. She met his eyes again. For the entirety of my long life, I have encountered thousands upon thousands of souls. Not one made the band stir. Until thee. The station shuddered. Emergency klaxons began to wail, and the lights flickered from red to amber. Betty's voice crackled in Hawk's earpiece, tinged with alarm. James, we have a problem. Multiple problems. Reactor core is showing cascade failure. Life support is compromised in 6 sectors. Communications are down. And I'm detecting sabotage markers in the system code. Hawk's blood went cold. How long until meltdown? 90 minutes, maybe less. He looked at Lyria, saw the same realization dawn in her eyes. This wasn't a random attack. This was coordinated. Someone wanted her dead and didn't care how many people burned with her. We need to move. Now. Hawk grabbed her uninjured arm, ignoring the renewed flare of light from the band. Can you walk? Barely, but They ran. The maintenance corridors provided some cover, but the station was already descending into chaos. Personnel rushed past, some heading for emergency stations, others just running. The intercom kept blaring evacuation warnings that everyone ignored because there was nowhere to evacuate to. Independent stations sat alone in high orbit hours from the nearest shuttle bay with enough capacity to handle 10,000 people. Betty, give me a route to the reactor core. Hawk pulled Lyria into a side passage as a team of security officers thundered past. Avoid main corridors. Plotting now. You should know, James, the sabotage is sophisticated, military grade. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Can you isolate the damage? Buy us some time, I'm trying. But the corruption is spreading through the entire system. It's like watching cancer metastasize. They descended 3 levels via a maintenance shaft that hadn't been used in years. Hawk went first, testing each rung before letting Lyria follow. Her breathing had gone ragged, her movements jerky with pain and blood loss. When they reached the bottom, she nearly collapsed. Hawk caught her, felt the band pulse between them. Steady, We're almost there, almost where Lyria's face had gone pale, her violet skin taking on an ashen hue. If thy station's core is failing, what canst thou do to stop it? I'll figure something out. The response came automatically, the same lie he'd told himself 1,000 times before. The same lie he'd told his squadron the day they flew into that ambush over Titan, when the enemy had known their flight path and their frequencies and their exact approach vector, because someone had fed them intelligence, and Hawk had led 6 pilots straight into a killing field because he'd trusted the wrong person. 6 coffins, 6 families destroyed. And Hawk, the only survivor, forced to live with the knowledge that his decisions had consequences. This time would be different. This time he wouldn't fail. They reached the reactor level to find the corridor sealed by emergency bulkheads. Hawk overrode the lockout with his maintenance credentials, and the massive doors ground open with agonizing slowness. The heat hit them first, a wall of superheated air that stank of ozone and burning insulation. Then the sound, the reactor's normal hum, had become a scream metal, and energy pushed past all safe parameters. The core chamber itself was a cathedral of technology, 3 stories of quantum containment fields and coolant systems surrounding the station's heart. Control consoles ringed the perimeter, all of them flashing red. Hawk pulled up the diagnostic screens and felt his stomach turn to ice. Every safety system was locked out. Every fail-safe disabled. The reactor was running at 200% capacity with no way to bleed off the excess energy. In 73 minutes, it would achieve critical mass and take half the station with it. Can it be repaired? Lyria stood beside him, her hand pressed against the console for support. Hawk shook his head. The console's fried. Everything that could stop this has been systematically destroyed. He pulled up screen after screen, each one showing the same story of deliberate, methodical sabotage. This wasn't just an attack on you. This was an attack on the entire treaty negotiation. Someone wants to start a war. The hardliners, Lyria's voice went bitter, in my government, in thine. They would rather see our people slaughter each other than risk the contamination of peace. She looked at the reactor, her expression hardening. Is there no way to access the core directly, bypass the damaged systems? There's one way. Hawk pulled up a schematic he'd hoped never to use. Neural interface. Direct connection between a human consciousness and the reactor's quantum processors. It was installed as a last resort option, but it's never been tested with an actual person. The theory is that human intuition combined with quantum processing could solve problems too complex for conventional AI. Then we use it. It's not that simple. Hawk zoomed in on the interface requirements. The power draw alone could kill whoever connects. And even if it doesn't, there's no guarantee it'll work. The reactor's too far gone. Then we have 70 minutes to make it work. Lyria met his eyes, and he saw in them the same desperate determination that had driven him into burning buildings and hostile fire for 4 decades. Unless thou hast a superior plan, he didn't. They both knew it. The neural interface port sat at the center of the core chamber, a crystalline pedestal surrounded by quantum field generators. Hawk approached it slowly, studying the connections. Standard military-grade neural jack compatible with the implants most soldiers received during basic training. He'd had his own installed back in 2041, though he'd never used it for anything more complex than accessing training sims. This would be different. This would be plugging his brain directly into a dying star and hoping he could teach it to calm down. Wait, Lyria's hand caught his arm before he could reach the interface. The band on her wrist flared bright enough to hurt. If thou dost this alone, thou wilt surely die. The power requirements, the cognitive load, no single mind could withstand it. I don't have a choice. Thou dost. Her grip tightened. We both do. The bandit proves we are compatible. Our neural patterns synchronize. If we connect together, the load distributes between us. We might survive. Hawk studied her face, searching for doubt. You don't even know me. We met 20 minutes ago. Why would you risk your life for this? Because 10,000 souls depend on us succeeding. Because my people and thine stand on the precipice of war or peace. Lyria's voice dropped lower, something vulnerable entering her expression. And because for the first time in 2 centuries I have met someone who makes this damn band light up. I would know why before I die. Fair enough. Hawk turned back to the interface. But you should know if we do this, the connection might be permanent. The system specifications mention something about neural binding. Once we sync, we might not be able to unsync. I understand, I mean really permanent, shared thoughts, shared memories. Everything you've ever done, every secret you've kept, every embarrassing moment, I'll see it all. And you'll see mine. Lyria's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. The band's light grew steady, a heartbeat rhythm pulsing between them. Then let us be certain our secrets are worth sharing. They approached the interface together. Two pedestals side by side, each with neural connectors that gleamed like liquid mercury. Hawk positioned himself at the left pedestal, Lyria at the right. The band on her wrist had begun to hum a frequency that resonated in his bones. On three, his hand hovered over the connector. On three, Lyria's fingers trembled just slightly. Colonel Hawkins, James, thank thee for saving my life, for trying to save our peoples, for being the answer to a prayer I had ceased to speak. Thank me when we survive this. Hawk took a breath. One, two, three. They reached for the interface simultaneously. The moment the neural jacks made contact, reality fractured. Hawk had expected pain. What he got instead was totality. Every barrier between his consciousness and Lyria's dissolved like tissue paper in a hurricane. Memories his and hers crashed together in a torrent that should have shattered both their minds. He was 7 years old in Texas learning to ride a bike while his father steadied the handlebars. He was 5 years old in the Crystal Palace of Velcora learning courtly protocols while tutors watched with cold, critical eyes. He was 19 in boot camp at Pendleton learning to break a man's arm in 3 places. She was 14 in the arena of trials learning to kill with efficiency and grace. He was 26 over Korea, his F-35 screaming through hostile airspace while missiles painted the night with fire. She was 32 before the High Council arguing for peace while ancient generals demanded blood. He was 43 in a hospital room watching his wife's hand go still cancer finally claiming what chemo couldn't kill. She was 112 in the throne room watching her parents burn in an explosion meant for her ascending to power on a foundation of ash and screams. He was 53 on Titan watching 6 pilots' life signs flatline because he'd trusted intelligence that was compromised, because he'd made the wrong call, because he failed. She was 245 and completely, utterly alone. The weight of Lyria's loneliness hit him like a physical blow. 2 centuries of ruling, of deciding, of holding the fate of trillions in hands that were never allowed to tremble. 2 centuries of lovers who wanted the crown advisors, who wanted influence, subjects who wanted a symbol. Never a single soul who looked at her and saw Lyria. Just Lyria. And his guilt, God, his guilt. 40 years of second-guessing every decision. 40 years of wondering if he could have saved them, should have seen the trap, might have been faster or smarter or better. 40 years of wearing his failures like a shroud and calling it penance. The reactor's quantum consciousness reached for them, and they reached back. Understanding bloomed. The reactor wasn't dying, it was drowning. Too much input, too many conflicting commands, safety protocols, a war with sabotage code in an endless loop. Like a heart beating out of rhythm, unable to find its pace. Hawk felt Lyria's presence beside him in the quantum space, her mind sharp and precise, where his was intuitive and flexible. Together they began to untangle the mess. Lyria's strategic thinking isolated the corrupted code, while Hawk's engineering instinct found workarounds. Her political acumen recognized patterns in the sabotage. This wasn't random chaos, but carefully orchestrated destruction, while his combat experience taught them both how to triage, to focus on what could be saved rather than what was already lost. Minutes or hours passed, time had no meaning in quantum space. The reactor's scream gradually lowered to a howl, then a groan finally settling into something approaching stability. They guided it back from the brink, degree by degree, coaxing rather than forcing, learning its rhythms and working within them. When they finally disconnected, Hawk collapsed. His knees hit the deck and only Lyria's arm around his shoulders kept him from pitching forward entirely. She wasn't in much better shape. Her breathing came in kiap, her skin slick with sweat. The core chamber had gone quiet. The emergency klaxons had stopped. The reactor's normal hum had returned gentle and steady as a sleeping giant's breath. We did it. Lyria's voice held wonder. We truly did it. Yeah. Hawk tried to stand, made it halfway before vertigo sent him back down. Give me a minute. But they didn't have a minute. The emergency bulkhead ground opes and a dozen figures in Valkyrian military armor poured through. Leading them was an older male, his violet skin marked with the scars of 1,000 battles, his eyes cold as stellar void. My Empress. The title dripped with contempt. How resourceful of thee to survive. Lyria's entire body went rigid. Chancellor Draven. Her voice lost all warmth. What art thou doing here, preventing a catastrophe? Draven gestured and his soldiers raised their weapons energy rifles that hummed with barely contained power. The catastrophe of thy bonding with this human filth. The band on Lyria's wrist pulsed bright. Draven's eyes tracked the light and something ugly twisted his features. Thou bonded, truly bonded. He stepped closer, his hand dropping to the ceremonial blade at his hip. 200 years I trained thee, 200 years I prepared thee to rule with strength and purity. And at the moment of thy greatest triumph, at the threshold of peace with these lesser beings, thou betrayest every lesson by bonding with one of them. Hawk forced himself to his feet, putting himself between Draven and Lyria, despite the weapons aimed at his chest. The bond wasn't her choice. The band lit up on its own. We didn't plan this. Oh, but the band never lies. Draven's smile had no warmth. It reveals truth-perfect compatibility, which means my empress has found her match in a human, an old broken human who reeks of failure and regret. He turned his gaze back to Lyria. Thy father would weep to see this disgrace. Lyria's hand found Hawk's, their fingers intertwining. The band flared brighter. My father believed in duty above all else, as do I, and my duty now is to both our peoples, human and Valkyrian alike. Then thou hast failed in that duty. Draven drew his blade. The reactor nearly destroyed this station. Life support failed in 6 sectors. Communications are severed. And convenient that all of this occurred mere hours before the treaty signing, is it not? His voice hardened. Convenient indeed for those who would use tragedy to forge unity through shared grief. You're saying we did this? Hawk's mind raced, fitting pieces together. You think we sabotaged the station? I think the treaty dies tonight. Draven gestured and his soldiers advanced. And so do the two of you. Draven's blade caught the emergency lighting as he stepped forward, its edge shimmering with contained energy. The weapon had been forged 3 centuries ago from the heart of a collapsed star, so Valkyrian legend claimed. Hawk believed it. The thing radiated menace like a living creature. Thou art surrounded. Draven's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Thy station crumbles. Thy alliance dies stillborn. Surrender now, and I shall grant thee both a swift end. Through the neural bond, Hawk felt Lyria's rage kindle into an inferno. She pulled her hand from his, and the separation felt like tearing skin. When she spoke, her voice carried the command of 12 generations of rulers. Thou wert my teacher, my mentor, the one I trusted above all others. Her eyes blazed. And thou orchestrated this massacre. These thousands of innocent, not I alone. Draven circled them, his soldiers maintaining their firing positions. The High Council grows weary of thy soft policies, Empress. Weary of watching thee grovel before these humans begging for scraps of cooperation. We are Valkyrian, we do not beg. We conquer, or we stand alone. Hawk's mind cataloged exits, threats, options. 12 soldiers, all armed with energy weapons capable of punching through station bulkheads. Draven himself, a master combatant with centuries of experience. The reactor core at their backs still fragile from the near meltdown. No weapons except his wrench still hanging from his belt. Terrible odds. But he'd faced worse. The sabotage. Lyria's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. The assassins in Sector 7. All of it orchestrated by the man who raised me. I raised thee to be strong. Draven's expression twisted with disappointment. Instead, thou became weak, sentimental, human-touched even before this abomination of a bond. The blade leveled at Hawk. And now thou hast literally bonded thyself to their weakness, to an aging warrior who leads his soldiers to death through incompetence. Hawk's jaw tightened. The bond let Lyria feel his surge of guilt, of old wounds torn fresh. She squeezed his hand. Thou knowest nothing of his strength. Her voice carried absolute conviction. I have seen his memories, Chancellor. Witnessed his battles, his sacrifices, his survival against odds that would have broken lesser beings. She stepped forward, despite the weapons tracking her movement. And I have seen thy true face at last, a coward who murders from shadows and calls it strength. Draven moved. The energy blade sang through the air in an arc meant to separate Lyria's head from her shoulders. Hawk's body reacted before thought could catch up. He shoved Lyria aside and brought his wrench up in a desperate parry. Metal screamed against energy. The impact sent shockwaves up Hawk's arm, nearly tearing the tool from his grip, but the blade glanced off. For 3 seconds, everyone froze in surprise. Then chaos erupted. Hawk dropped low as energy bolts scorched the air where his head had been. He rolled, came up behind a control console, dragged Lyria with him. The console exploded in sparks as concentrated fire reduced it to slag. How Draven's voice carried genuine shock. How does primitive metal deflect a star-forged blade? Because this primitive metal has saved my life in 6 different wars. Hawk risked a glance around the console's remains. And because I'm too stubborn to die on your schedule. The neural bond suddenly flared hot. Hawk felt Lyria's tactical mind engage her 2 centuries of strategic training kicking in. Images flooded through their connection building layouts, structural weaknesses, potential escape routes. She'd memorized every schematic of Independence Station during the flight. Here, standard diplomatic preparation. The coolant junction. Her thoughts pressed into his mind as clearly as spoken words. 30 meters north. If we can reach it, we vent the chamber. Hawk finished the thought. Freeze them out, or freeze ourselves. Better than being shot. They moved as one entity, their synchronization perfect, through the bond. Hawk provided covering fire with a piece of debris hurled hard enough to crack a soldier's faceplate. Lyria vaulted over a railing with inhuman grace, landing in a crouch that would have shattered Hawk's knees. He took the long way, using maintenance ladders and overhead pipes, his engineer's knowledge of the station's layout guiding each step. Energy bolts chased them. One caught Hawk's shoulder, and pain exploded through his nervous system. Through the bond, Lyria gasped, feeling his agony as her own. Her rage intensified, and suddenly Hawk understood she wasn't just angry at Draven's betrayal. She was furious that someone had dared hurt her bondmate. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. They reached the coolant junction as Draven's forces closed in. Hawk's fingers flew over the emergency controls while Lyria positioned herself to guard his back. The system required a 3-minute override sequence, 3 minutes they absolutely didn't have. Unless... James, Lyria's mental voice carried urgency. The bond. We can interface together again, accelerate the process. It's too soon. We just disconnected from the reactor. Another neural sync could fry our brains. Then we shall have matching scars. Her hand found his on the control panel. The bond ignited, and once again, Hawk found himself drowning in her consciousness. But this time they didn't fight the connection, they rode it like a breaking wave. Lyria's tactical precision merged with his engineering intuition, and together they ripped through the coolant system's safety protocols in 30 seconds. Klaxons wailed. Vents along the chamber's ceiling cracked open, and liquid nitrogen began to pour forth in billowing clouds. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Draven's soldiers scattered their armor's thermal systems, struggling against the sudden cold. But Draven himself seemed unaffected. He strode through the freezing mist, his blade held low, his eyes locked on Lyria with the focus of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Thou canst run no longer, child. His breath misted in the frigid air. Face thy failure with what dignity remains. I am not thy child. Lyria stepped out of cover to meet him. I am Empress of Valkyria, and thou art guilty of treason most foul. They met in the center of the chamber, blade against nothing. Draven's first strike should have ended it, a lightning-fast thrust aimed at Lyria's heart. But she wasn't alone. Through the bond, Hawk fed her his combat instincts, decades of close-quarters fighting compressed into pure reflex. She twisted, and the blade passed a hair's breadth from her ribs. Her counterstrike came from an angle Draven couldn't have predicted because it came from Hawk's Marine Corps training, not Valkyrian martial arts. Her palm heel caught the old warrior's solar plexus, and even through his armor, the impact made him stumble. Impossible. Draven's eyes widened. Thou hast no combat training in human styles. I do now. Lyria's smile held no warmth. We share everything, Chancellor. His strength, his skill, his refusal to surrender. Hawk felt her drawing on his memories, the brutal efficiency of Pendleton, training the desperation of Titan, the cold fury of survival against impossible odds. She moved like him, thought like him, fought like him, and he fed her everything he had, every dirty trick and desperate gambit learned in 40 years of staying alive. Draven adapted. His centuries of experience let him read their combined style, anticipate their moves. He began to land hits, small ones, at first testing cuts that drew violet blood. Through the bond, Hawk felt each wound as if it were his own flesh opening. The soldiers were recovering their thermal systems, compensating for the cold. In seconds, they'd have clear shots again. Hawk needed to even the odds. He grabbed a coolant pipe and wrenched it free. High-pressure nitrogen sprayed in a directed stream, and he aimed it at the nearest soldier. The man's armor froze solid in 3 seconds. Hawk swung the pipe like a bat, and the soldier shattered into crystalline fragments. The others opened fire. Hawk dove rolled, came up behind a support pillar as energy bolts reduced his previous position to molten metal. 5 soldiers left, plus Draven. Still terrible odds, but better. Through their connection, he felt Lyria's strategy forming. She couldn't beat Draven in a straight fight, not while he held that star-forged blade. But she didn't need to beat him. She needed to distract him. James, her mental voice was calm despite the blood streaming from a dozen cuts. When I give the signal, cut the gravity, you'll fall too. I trust thee to catch me. Before he could protest, Lyria launched into a furious assault. Every technique Hawk had ever learned she threw at Draven in a storm of strikes that forced the old warrior back. He parried, riposted, drew more blood, but she kept coming, kept pressing, and then she stumbled. It looked accidental, a slip on blood-slicked deck plating. Draven's blade swept up for the killing blow, triumph blazing in his ancient eyes. Now Hawk hit the gravity controls. The chamber's artificial gravity cut out instantly. Draven's killing strike passed through empty air as Lyria pushed off the deck, floating backward. The soldiers caught mid-advance, tumbled in confusion. Only Hawk was prepared. He'd already grabbed a handhold. He caught Lyria as she sailed past, one arm around her waist, and used their combined momentum to swing toward the nearest soldier. His wrench caved in the man's faceplate. They pushed off the corpse, redirecting toward another target. Lyria's hands found a rifle, tore it free, and she fired point-blank into a third soldier's chest. Zero-G combat. Hawk's mind supplied the memory without conscious effort. Orbital assault training 2048. 3 dimensions, no up or down. Movement equals vulnerability. Lyria absorbed the knowledge like drinking water. Together they became a single lethal organism, pinballing between targets with brutal efficiency. Another soldier down. Another. The last 2 tried to group up, present a unified defense. Hawk threw his wrench. The ancient tool survivor of 6 wars, savior of 100 lives, tumbled end over end through zero gravity and caught one soldier square in the throat. The man's helmet cracked. His scream died as atmosphere vented through the breach. The final soldier tried to run. Lyria shot him in the back. Only Draven remained floating amid the carnage of his failed coup. Blood droplets drifted around him like crimson stars, and his expression had moved past rage into something colder. Acceptance, perhaps, or determination. Well fought. He oriented himself to face them, blade still clutched in his hand. Thou hast learned much in mere hours, Empress. Thy bonded skills serve thee well. They do. Lyria floated beside Hawk, their hands linked, the bond pulsing between them. Surrender, Draven. This need not end in thy death, but it must end in someone's death. The old warrior's voice carried resignation. I have lived 4 centuries, served thy family for 3, and I have learned one truth above all others. Peace with humans is poison. It weakens us, dilutes us, destroys everything that makes Valkyria strong, or it could make us stronger. Lyria's voice softened. Imagine what we might achieve together, 2 species I have imagined. Draven's smile was bitter. I have read the history, studied the precedents. 11 times our people attempted cooperation with other species. 11 times we paid in blood and ash. He raised his blade. I will not permit a 12th. He pushed off toward them, the blade leading. But this time Hawk was ready. He understood. Draven now saw the pattern. The old warrior fought like someone who believed death was preferable to change. Someone who'd rather burn the world than watch it transform into something unrecognizable. Hawk had known soldiers like that, had been one for a while after his wife died and his son followed. He recognized the particular exhaustion of someone who'd lost everything worth living for, except the mission. He almost pitied Draven. Almost. The blade came at them in a thrust meant to skewer both their bodies at once. Hawk released Lyria, pushed her aside, and grabbed the support beam beside him. His legs came up in a move his knees would hate him for later, catching Draven in the chest. The old warrior's momentum worked against him. He tumbled backward, his strike thrown off course. Lyria was already moving. She'd retrieved Hawk's wrench and she swung it with everything she had. The tool, mundane metal, decades old, held together by prayer and stubbornness, but he caught the star-forged blade at its weakest point. The blade shattered. Pieces of crystallized starfire spun through zero gravity like dying fireflies. Draven stared at the broken hilt in his hand, genuine shock replacing his cold certainty. His weapon, forged from collapsed stellar matter, shattered by a maintenance tool from Earth. The metaphor was almost too perfect. Hawk caught himself on a railing and restored gravity. They fell together, him, Lyria, Draven, and the still warm corpses of the soldiers. Hawk's knees screamed as he hit the deck, but he stayed upright. Lyria landed with inhuman grace, wrench still clutched in both hands. Draven landed on his back. Blood leaked from beneath his armor, internal injuries from their brief but brutal fight. He coughed violet blood, speckling his lips, and laughed. Fitting. The legendary Chancellor undone by a human's wrench. He turned his head toward Lyria. Kill me then. Complete thy betrayal. No, Lyria tossed the wrench aside. Thou shalt live to see the peace thou sought to destroy. Shalt watch as our peoples build something stronger than thy fear. Draven's laugh turned into a wet cough. Thou art naive, child. Peace is the cruelest dream of all. Then thou wilt suffer the cruelty of watching it come true. Lyria knelt beside her former mentor, and despite everything, her eyes held tears. I love thee as a father, Chancellor. Thy betrayal wounds deeper than any blade. But I shall not compound thy sins with more death. Mercy, Draven's sneer twisted his bloodied face. The last refuge of the weak, or the first choice of the strong. Hawk moved to stand beside Lyria. Because killing you would be easy. Living with what you've done, that takes real courage. Before Draven could respond, the chamber's emergency bulkhead groaned open. Armed security personnel poured through human soldiers, this time their weapons trained on the carnage. Leading them was Captain Martinez, Independence Station's chief of security, her dark eyes taking in the scene with professional efficiency. Colonel Hawkins, her weapon tracked to Draven, noting the broken blade, the bodies. Sir, what the hell happened here? Assassination attempt on the Empress. Attempted genocide via reactor sabotage. Hawk's voice came out steady despite his exhaustion. Chancellor Draven orchestrated the whole thing. He's alive. Keep him that way for trial. Martinez gestured and two soldiers moved to secure Draven. The old Valkyrian didn't resist. He simply stared at Lyria with something that might have been disappointment or pride or both. The treaty. Lyria's hand found Hawk's. Is the delegation safe? We evacuated them to the secure wing when the reactor alert hit. Martinez lowered her weapon. They're shaken but alive. Empress, with respect, you look like hell. Let me get medical. Not yet. Lyria straightened despite her wounds. The treaty signing is scheduled for dawn. Yes, ma'am, with respect, half the station thinks you're dead. The other half thinks you tried to blow us all up. Martinez shook her head. Maybe we postpone until number. Lyria's voice carried absolute authority. If we delay, if we show weakness, the hardliners on both sides will claim victory. They will say the bond between human and Valkyrian is cursed, that cooperation brings only death. Her hand tightened on Hawk's. We sign at dawn, as planned, and we show our peoples that we will not be cowed by those who deal in fear. Hawk felt her determination through the bond, felt also her fear and pain. She was running on pure willpower, her body screaming for rest. But she was right, delay, now, and Draven's coup might succeed anyway. Fear could kill a peace treaty as efficiently as any bomb. The Empress is correct. A new voice, this one distinctly Valkyrian. A tall male pushed through the human security forces, his armor bearing the markings of Valkyrian elite guard. His face, scarred serious, held the same bone structure as Lyria's. Commander Kael Valin, brother. Lyria's shock rippled through the bond. Kael, thou art here. I arrived with the relief forces. Kael's eyes swept the chamber, cataloging the destruction. When news of the reactor failure reached us, I feared the worst. He stepped closer, and Hawk noticed his hand rested on his sidearm. Then I heard thou hadst bonded with a human. The way he said human made it sound like a curse. Through the bond, Hawk felt Lyria's heart sink. Her brother, one of the few people she truly loved, and his expression held the same disappointment Draven had shown. Lyria lifted her wrist, showing the glowing band. The bond is real, Kael. True in every way. I can see that. Kael's jaw tightened. I can also see thou hast killed a dozen Valkyrian soldiers and shattered the Chancellor who raised us both. They were traitors. Lyria's voice hardened. They sought to murder me and ignite war between our peoples. Draven confessed as much. So thou says. Kael's hand tightened on his weapon. But I see a human warrior who arrived mere hours ago and now stands bonded to my sister amidst bodies of our people. Convenient is it not Hawk's blood went cold. The accusation was insane but also logical from a certain perspective. An outside agitator arrives, bonds to the Empress, leaves destruction in his wake. The perfect false flag operation. Brother, please. Lyria stepped forward. Thou knowest me, knowest my heart. Would I bond with one who may not harm to our people I knew thee? Kael's voice carried grief. Before this bond changed thee, before thou chose an alien warrior over thy own blood, I chose nothing. The bond chose us. Lyria's desperation bled through into Hawk's mind. The band does not lie, Kael. It never lies. Then perhaps the band is flawed. Kael drew his sidearm fully, or perhaps it has been tampered with. Either way, sister, thou hast thrown our people into chaos. The High Council demands answers. They demand justice, and they demand trial by combat to prove the worthiness of thy bond. Trial by combat, Hawk's military training supplied the reference ancient Valkyrian tradition, older than their written history. A challenge to prove truth through strength. Are you serious? Deadly serious, human? Kael's eyes locked on Hawk with absolute focus. If thy bond is true, if thou art worthy of my sister, thou wilt face me in the arena. Defeat me, and the bond shall be recognized by all Valkyria. Fail, and Lyria abdicates her throne and returns home. Without thee, Kael Numbro. Lyria moved between them. He is injured, exhausted. This is law. Kael's expression softened slightly. I take no joy in this, sister, but the council has spoken. Half our government believes thou art under human influence, that this bond is some form of mental manipulation. The other half believes the human orchestrated everything to gain control of our empire through thee. He holstered his weapon. Only trial by combat can prove the truth. Hawk's mind raced. He was 68 years old, battered, running on fumes. Kael looked to be in his physical prime, probably 200 years of training, peak Valkyrian conditioning, and the benefit of not having just fought a dozen soldiers and nearly died multiple times. In a straight fight, Hawk would last maybe 30 seconds. But through the bond, he felt Lyria's tactical mind already working the problem. She saw what he saw, and she began more. The bond was their advantage. No Valkyrian warrior had ever fought with a fully synchronized battle partner feeding him real-time tactical data. Kael would be alone. They would be two minds in two bodies acting as one. It was a chance. Maybe their only chance. I accept. Hawk met Kael's eyes. When and where dawn? The arena of trials aboard the diplomatic vessel. Kael nodded slowly, something like respect entering his expression. Prepare thyself, human. I am the finest warrior Valkyria has produced in 3 generations. I will not dishonor my sister by showing mercy. I wouldn't expect you to. Hawk extended his hand, a human gesture of respect. But know this, Commander. I've survived 6 wars by being too stubborn to die. I'm not planning to start now. Kael stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and grasped it. His grip could have crushed stone, but Hawk matched it without flinching. At dawn, then, Kael released his hand and stepped back. May the worthiest warrior prevail. He turned and strode from the chamber, his troops falling in behind him. The human security forces remained waiting for Martina's orders. She looked at Hawk with concern. Sir, with respect, you look half dead already. Fighting a Valkyrian champion in 7 hours seems like suicide. Probably. Hawk retrieved his wrench from where Lyria had dropped it. But if I don't, everything we've worked for dies anyway. He turned to Lyria. You got any advice on beating your brother I? Her smile held more sadness than humor. Survive the first 30 seconds. After that, he typically grows overconfident. Great. Hawk felt exhaustion pulling at him like gravity. Any other pearls of wisdom do not die. Through the bond he felt her fear, her desperation, her absolute refusal to lose him, now that she'd finally found him. Please, James, do not die. He pulled her close, ignoring the watching soldiers and the weight of two civilizations' expectations. The bond flared between them, bright and warm and impossibly real. I've got too much to live for now. His lips brushed her forehead. I'm not going anywhere. But even as he said it, he felt the lie. Kale was a killer trained from birth, enhanced by centuries of experience. Hawk was an old soldier held together by spite and stubbornness. The trial by combat would be a massacre, unless they found another way. The arena of trials had been constructed inside the Valkyrian diplomatic vessel's largest hold, a space originally designed for cargo, but now transformed into something ancient and terrible. Crystalline walls rose 30 meters high, their surfaces etched with the names of 10,000 warriors who'd fought here over millennia. The floor was polished obsidian, dark enough to reflect the overhead lighting like stars in a night sky. Hawk stood at one end, wearing nothing but his maintenance coveralls and his faith in borrowed time. They'd offered him armor lightweight composite that might have stopped a blade or two, but he'd refused. Armor meant weight, and weight meant slower reactions. At 68, he needed every advantage speed could provide. Across the arena, K.L. Valin emerged from the opposite entrance. He wore full Valkyrian battle dress, segmented plates that flowed like liquid metal, a helmet that left only his eyes visible, and twin energy blades mounted on his forearms. The crowd, a mix of human and Valkyrian diplomats, drew a collective breath at the sight. Through the neural bond, Hawk felt Lyria's terror spike. She sat in the royal observation box, forbidden by tradition from interfering. But her mind pressed against his, sharing everything she knew about KL's fighting style, his patterns, his tells. He favors his left side. Her mental voice was steady despite her fear. An old injury from a duel on Valkyra Prime century ago. He compensates well, but under pressure, he protects it. Noted, Hawk rolled his shoulders, feeling joints pop. Anything else, he believes in honor above all things. If thou canst make him see the bond as honorable as true, then I still have to beat him first. Hawk's lips quirked. One thing at a time. The arena master, an ancient Valkyrian female whose face held more scars than skin, stepped to the center. Her voice carried across the space without amplification, a lifetime of command making her heard. This trial is sanctioned by the High Council of Valkyria and witnessed by the diplomatic corps of Earth. The combatants shall fight until one yields, falls, or dies. The victor's truth becomes law. She turned to Kael. Commander Kael Valen, state thy challenge. Kael's voice rang clear. I challenge the validity of the bond between Empress Lyria Valen Imaos and the human James Hawkins. I claim it is false, born of manipulation or malfunction. Let combat prove the truth. The arena master turned to Hawk. James Hawkins, how dost thou answer? Hawk met Kael's eyes across the arena. The bond is real. Your sister and I are connected in every way that matters. And I'll prove it by staying alive long enough to make you believe it. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Staying alive wasn't the same as winning, but for an aging human facing a Valkyrian champion, it might be the only realistic goal. Then let combat begin. The arena master raised her hand. Fight with honor. Die with dignity. May truth prevail. She dropped her hand and vanished through a side door with surprising speed. The moment she cleared the arena floor, Kael attacked. He moved like lightning given form. 1 second he stood 30 meters away. The next his blade sang toward Hawk's throat. Only the bond saved him. Lyria's tactical mind screamed the warning a split second before Kael moved and Hawk threw himself sideways. The blade passed close enough to singe his hair. Hawk rolled, came up in a crouch, and immediately had to dodge again. Kael's assault was relentless, a storm of cuts and thrusts that gave no time to breathe, let alone counter. Each strike came from a different angle, each one faster than the last. Through the bond, Lyria fed him data. Kael's preferred combinations, his rhythm, the microsecond gaps between attacks. Hawk's body moved on instinct, his 4 decades of combat experience merging with her 2 centuries of strategic knowledge. He couldn't match Kael's speed, but he could predict where the attacks would land. Could be somewhere else when they arrived. For 90 seconds, Hawk survived through pure defensive movement. Not a single counterstrike, just desperate evasion. The crowd grew restless. They'd expected a fight, not a prolonged execution. But Lyria had been right. After those first 90 seconds, Kael's attacks grew less precise. Not much, just enough that Hawk could start to read them without the bond's help. The Valkyrian champion had expected this to be over quickly. The fact that it wasn't had thrown off his timing. Hawk seized the opening. When Kael lunged, Hawk didn't dodge. He stepped inside the attack, past the blade's edge, and drove his elbow into Kael's helmet. The impact sent shockwaves up his arm, but he felt the helmet crack. Kael staggered. Hawk pressed forward, not giving him time to reset. A knee to the midsection, bouncing off armor, but forcing Kael back. A palm strike to the chest, another to the shoulder. None of the hits did real damage, but they disrupted Kael's rhythm, forced him to defend instead of attack. For 10 glorious seconds, Hawk was winning. Then Kael adapted. The Valkyrian warrior's blade caught Hawk across the ribs, a shallow cut that burned like touching molten metal. Hawk gasped, stumbled back, and Kael's follow-up strike would have taken his head if not for Lyria's screamed warning through the bond. He dropped flat, felt the blade pass overhead, and rolled away. Blood soaked through his coveralls. The cut wasn't deep, but it didn't need to be. Kael had centuries to wear him down. Hawk had minutes before blood loss and exhaustion won the fight for his opponent. Change tactics. Lyria's mental voice carried urgency. Thou canst not win through attrition. What do you suggest? Hawk circled, keeping distance, trying to catch his breath. The bond. Use it fully. Let me see through thy eyes. Let me move thy limbs. That's not possible. Even as he thought it, Hawk remembered the reactor core. They'd merge consciousness, then become a single entity, operating a quantum system. Could they do the same now? Merge their minds so completely that Hawk's body moved with Lyria's tactical genius. It is possible. Lyria's determination blazed through the bond. We have done it before. Do it now. Trust me, James. Kael charged again. Hawk had seconds to decide, keep fighting alone and lose, or surrender control and maybe possibly survive. He chose trust. The bond exploded open. Where before it had been a connection, now it became fusion. Hawk felt his sense of self blur and expand, felt Lyria's consciousness pour into his, like water finding its level. His eyes became her eyes. His muscles moved with her muscle memory. His body executed techniques he'd never learned because she'd learned them for him. Kael's blade descended. Hawk's body twisted in a move from Valkyra, the 8,000-year-old Valkyrian martial art. The blade missed by a hair. Hawk's Lyria's, their counter-strike, caught Kael's wrist, hyperextending the joint. The energy blade flickered and died. Kael's eyes widened behind his cracked helmet. Impossible. That move is from the seventh form taught only to royalty. Hawk's voice, but Lyria's words. Did thou forget, brother, that we trained together, that I know every technique thou knowest? They fought as one being. Hawk's raw physicality merged with Lyria's technical perfection. Where he had strength, she had precision. Where he had instinct, she had strategy. Together they became something neither human nor Valkyrian, something new. Kael matched them blow for blow. His remaining blades sang through the air in patterns that would have mesmerized a lesser opponent. But Hawk and Lyria moved through the storm like dancers, each strike predicted and countered before it could land. The arena master had said, fight until one yields, falls, or dies. Hawk had no intention of dying, and he was beginning to suspect he might not fall either. But winning meant more than survival. It meant proving the bond's truth, and truth couldn't be proven through violence alone. Kael, Hawk's voice carried across the arena even as their bodies continued their lethal dance. Why do you really fight? Is it honor or fear? The question caught Kael off guard. His next strike went wide and Hawk slipped inside his guard. Instead of attacking, Hawk grabbed Kael's arm, the one protecting that old injury Lyria had mentioned. I can feel it through the bond. Hawk's grip was gentle despite the combat. Your sister's fear that she's losing you. Her memory of teaching you to fly back when you both were children. Her love for you that hasn't diminished despite your challenge. Release me. Kael tried to break the grip, but Hawk held firm. She doesn't want to rule alone. Hawk felt Lyria's emotions bleeding through her desperate hope that her brother might understand. She wants family. She wants you beside her as she builds this peace. But she won't beg, and she won't abandon the bond. Because it's real, Kael. More real than anything either of us has ever known. Thou knowest nothing of I know loss. Hawk's voice dropped, carrying the weight of 40 years' grief. I lost my wife to cancer, lost my son to war, spent 15 years convinced I deserved the loneliness because I'd failed them both. His grip tightened slightly. Your sister showed me I was wrong. The bond showed me I could still be more than my failures. Kael's free hand came up, blade igniting for a killing strike. The crowd tensed. Through the bond, Hawk felt Lyria's scream building, but the strike never fell. Kael's arm trembled, blade hovering inches from Hawk's throat. His eyes visible through the cracked helmet held torment. I cannot, his voice broke. I cannot kill the one who makes my sister whole. The blade deactivated. Kael's arm fell to his side. Around the arena, absolute silence reigned. Thou speakest of loss human, Kael's voice carried across the suddenly quiet space. I too have lost. I lost my parents to assassination. Lost my claim to the throne when Lyria was born. Lost my sister to the duties of an empress, who could never simply be my sibling. His helmet retracted, revealing a face marked by tears. And now I fear losing her to thee, to this bond that takes her farther from everything I know. You're not losing her. Hawk released Kael's arm. You're gaining a brother-in-law who's going to need your help navigating Valkyrian politics. Because I don't know the first thing about running an empire, and Lyria is going to need both of us to make this peace work. Kael stared at him, searching for deception and finding only exhaustion and sincerity. Thou truly believest in this alliance, in peace between our peoples. I believe in your sister. Hawk smiled despite the pain from his wounds. And she believes in peace. That's good enough for me. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, deliberately, Kael knelt. He placed his blade on the obsidian floor and bowed his head. The bond is proven true. His voice carried absolute conviction. Colonel James Hawkins has passed the trial. Let it be known across all Valkyria, the Empress's choice is worthy. The arena erupted. Half the crowd cheered, the other half sat in stunned silence. But Hawk barely heard them. Through the bond, he felt Lyria's overwhelming relief, her joy, her love crashing over him like a tidal wave. She vaulted from the observation box, a 3-story drop that would have killed a human, and landed running. Seconds later, she crashed into him, her arms wrapping around his chest, heedless of his wounds. Thou art alive, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Thou did not die. Takes more than your brother to kill me. Hawk held her close, feeling the bond pulse between them. Though I'll admit it was a close thing. Kael approached, his expression complex. Sister, James, he inclined his head. I offer my apology for doubting, and my service to your bond and your reign. Lyria pulled back from Hawk just enough to meet her brother's eyes. No apology needed, Kael. Thou didst thy duty. She extended her hand, palm up, a Valkyrian gesture of family. Stand with us. Help us build what comes next. Kael grasped her hand, then Hawk's, joining all three in a grip that symbolized more than alliance. Family. Forged not through blood alone, but through trust proven and challenges overcome. The moment broke when Captain Martinez's voice crackled over the arena's comm system. Hate to interrupt the touching scene, but we've got a situation. Another Valkyrian ship just dropped out of FTL, Dreadnought class, and they're not answering hails. The blood drained from Kael's face. Extinction. Grand Marshal Voss's flagship, who Hawk felt Lyria's dread spike through the bond, the supreme commander of our armada. Kael's hand went to his blade, and the true architect of the coup. Draven was merely his pawn. Through the observation windows, Hawk could see the massive vessel. It dwarfed the diplomatic ship, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. As he watched, smaller craft began launching from its bays, fighters, dropships, boarding vessels. They are coming for thee, sister. Kael's voice held grim certainty. Voss will not permit thy bond to stand. He seeks war with humanity, always has. This peace threatens his power. Then we stop him. Hawk's tactical mind engaged years of military planning, crystallizing into action. How many ships can we count on? Few. Kael's expression was bleak. Most of the fleet answers to Voss. Those who support thee are scattered across 3 systems. What about humans? Hawk turned to where Martinez was coordinating with her security forces. Captain, what's our defensive capability? Against a Valkyrian dreadnought, Martinez's laugh held no humor. We've got 3 corvettes and a prayer. That thing could vaporize Independence Station in a single volley. Through the bond, Hawk felt Lyria's mind racing, calculating odds, analyzing options. She'd been trained from birth to think strategically, to see patterns others missed. And what she saw now terrified her. Voss will not attack directly. Her mental voice was grim. He will demand my surrender, will threaten to destroy the station unless I submit to trial for treason, and if you refuse, 10,000 die. Her fear bled through. He cares nothing for Valkyrian lives aboard. They are merely leverage, and human deaths serve his purpose well. Martyrs to rally his faction, proof that alliance with humans brings only death. The diplomatic vessel's main screen flickered to life. A Valkyrian male appeared ancient beyond measure, his scarred face a roadmap of centuries of warfare. He wore the full regalia of a Grand Marshal medals and honors covering his chest like armor. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Empress Lyria Valen, thou art charged with treason against the Valkyrian Empire. Thou hast bonded with an alien, murdered loyal soldiers, and collaborated with enemies of our state. Surrender thyself for judgment, and these humans shall live. Refuse, and I will reduce their station to atoms. Behind Vosshawk could see the Dreadnought's main weapons powering up. Energy signatures that registered off the scale enough firepower to punch through any defense-independent station could muster. Thou hast 1 hour to comply. Voss's image flickered out. Lyria's hands clenched into fists. I must go, must face him alone. No, Hawk grabbed her shoulders. We didn't come this far to let you sacrifice yourself. What choice remains? Her eyes blazed with desperate fury. I am Empress. My life for my peoples, it is the bargain I made when I took the crown. The bargain you made was to protect them. Hawk's mind raced puzzle pieces sliding together. Through the bond, he felt Lyria's tactical genius merging with his own combat instincts, and suddenly he saw it. The one option they'd both overlooked. You said Voss wants a trial eye, but then he has to bring you aboard his ship, has to let you into his stronghold. Hawk turned to Kyle. How many loyalists do you have on the Extinction? Perhaps 50, scattered throughout various departments. Kale's eyes widened. Thou canst not be suggesting. I'm suggesting we turn his demand into our opportunity. Hawk pulled up schematics of Dreadnought-class vessels on the nearest terminal. Lyria goes aboard as ordered, but she doesn't go alone. I go with her through the bond. And while Voss is focused on his trial, we take his ship from the inside. That is suicide. KL's voice flat. The Extinction houses 2,000 crew, enhanced warriors all loyal to Voss. 2,000 crew, but only one quantum core. Hawk traced the power distribution on the schematic. Same system as Independence Station's reactor. And we've already proven we can interface with quantum cores together. Thou wouldst sync with the Extinction. Lyria's shock rippled through the bond. That much power, that much data, it could kill us both. So could letting Voss bombard the station. Hawk met her eyes. I'm not saying it's a good plan, but it's the only plan where everyone doesn't die. Kale studied the schematic, his tactical mind analyzing angles. If, and this is a catastrophic if, you could seize control of the core, my loyalists could secure key systems, engineering, weapons, life support. And with the flagship's weapons, we could force the rest of Voss's fleet to stand down. Hawk's smile held no warmth. Checkmate in one move. Or death in one move. Lyria's hand found his. James, I cannot ask thee to. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. Hawk squeezed her hand. Besides, someone's got to make sure you don't have all the fun. Through the bond, he felt her terror and her desperate hope warring. Felt also her absolute certainty that she'd rather die beside him than live without him. The realization should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt inevitable. We do this together. Her voice firmed with decision. As we have done everything since the bond formed. Then we'd better hurry. Hawk checked the time. We've got 43 minutes to plan an infiltration coordinate with KL's people and somehow survive whatever Voss has waiting. Merely 43 minutes. Lyria's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then we shall have time to spare. They spent the next half hour in frantic preparation. KL contacted his loyalists aboard the Extinction through encrypted channels, positioning them near critical systems. Martinez armed Hawk with what little she could, a sidearm, a blade, a prayer. The human diplomats protested loudly until Hawk explained that loud protests were exactly what they needed. Make it look like the humans were furious at Lyria's surrender. Make Voss believe his psychological warfare had succeeded. 20 minutes before the deadline, Lyria stood at the airlock. She changed into formal Empress regalia, flowing robes that somehow made her look both regal and ready for war. The neural resonance band on her wrist pulsed steady and bright. Hawk stood beside her wearing whatever dignity his blood-stained maintenance coveralls could provide. Last chance to reconsider. His voice was light, but through the bond she felt his fear. I ceased reconsidering the moment the band lit for thee. Lyria took his hand. Whatever comes, we face it together. The airlock cycled open. Beyond a Valkyrian shuttle waited all sharp angles and menacing grace. They walked forward together, leaving behind Kael's worried face and Martinez's grim salute. The shuttle's interior smelled of ozone and old violence. The pilot, one of Voss's personal guard, sneered at Hawk. The human comes too. How touching. He comes. Lyria's voice brooked no argument. The bond cannot be severed by distance. Where I go, he goes. The pilot shrugged and sealed the hatch. The shuttle launched, crossing the void between Independence Station and the extinction with terrifying speed. Through the viewport, Hawk watched the dreadnought grow from ship to city to world. Its weapons tracked their approach, ready to fire at the first sign of treachery. Lyria's hand tightened on his. Through the bond, he felt her love, her fear, her absolute determination. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of two species, no pressure. The shuttle docked. The hatch opened. They stepped into hell. Voss waited in the docking bay, surrounded by 100 armed soldiers. The Grand Marshal's scarred face split in a predator's smile. My Empress. He bowed with exaggerated courtesy. How kind of thee to accept my invitation. And thou brought thy pet human. How convenient I can judge you both together. This trial is a farce. Lyria's voice rang clear. Thou seekest not justice, but war. I seek survival. Voss gestured and his soldiers closed in. Our species has endured 10,000 years through strength and purity. Thou wouldst throw it away for sentiment, for weakness, for evolution. Hawk stepped forward, drawing every eye. Your species survived by adapting, by learning. Lyria's trying to teach you the next adaptation: cooperation instead of conquest. Cooperation. Voss spat the word like poison. I have seen cooperation. Watched it weaken 3 civilizations until they collapsed into dust. He drew a blade that hummed with barely contained energy. No. Better to burn bright and die strong than to fade through compromise. Then thou art already dead. Lyria's eyes blazed. Thou simply hast not realized it yet. Voss's smile vanished. Take them to the arena. We shall see whose vision prevails. The soldiers moved in, but as their hands closed on Hawk and Lyria, both prisoners smiled, because they just crossed the threshold they needed. They were inside the fortress, inside the very heart of Voss's power, and the quantum core waited 3 decks below. The arena aboard the Extinction was smaller than the one on the diplomatic vessel, but no less deadly. Voss had intended it for his personal training, a place where he could maintain his combat edge despite his 4 centuries of life. Now it would serve as a courtroom, jury box, and execution chamber all in one. But Voss made a mistake. He was so confident in his superiority, so certain of his inevitable victory, that he allowed Hawk and Lyria to walk together to the arena instead of separating them. Through the bond, they communicated in fractions of a second, planning their escape with the speed of thought. 3 decks down, Lyria's mental voice was crystal clear. The core chamber. If we can reach it before they realize our intent, we will. Hawk's eyes scanned the corridors as the guards marched them forward. Kael's people are in position. When we make our move, they'll create the diversion we need. And if we fail, then we die together. Better than dying alone. The arena doors loomed ahead. Voss strode beside them, his blade resting casually on his shoulder. He was speaking, delivering some kind of speech about purity and strength and the necessary brutality of survival. Hawk tuned him out, focused instead on counting steps, memorizing the layout, preparing for the moment. It came sooner than expected. An explosion rocked the ship, not large enough to cause real damage, but enough to make everyone stumble. Alarms began to wail. Kael's loyalists right on schedule. Engineering reports a coolant leak. A soldier's voice crackled over the comms. Deck 7, Section 12. Voss's eyes narrowed. Sabotage. He turned to his guards. Double the watch on the core. And keep these 2 under. Hawk moved. He'd palmed the knife Martinez had given him, kept it hidden against his wrist throughout the shuttle ride. Now he drove it into the nearest guard's throat, pulled the man's sidearm free, and fired 3 shots before anyone could react. 2 guards down, a third screaming and clutching his shattered knee. Lyria was already running. She'd memorized the ship's layout from KL's intel, knew every corridor and junction. Hawk followed, firing backward as Voss's remaining guards gave chase. "Stop them!" Voss's roar echoed through the corridor. "Seal all access to the core. Too slow." KL's people had already compromised the security systems. Doors that should have locked remained open. Bulkheads that should have dropped stayed raised. Every obstacle Voss tried to throw in their path had been sabotaged in advance. They reached a maintenance shaft. Lyria didn't hesitate. She ripped the grate free and dropped into darkness. Hawk followed, landing in a crouch that sent pain shooting through his knees. They were 68 years old and climbing through maintenance shafts like a rookie soldier. His body would hate him for this later, if he had a later. The shaft led them down, always down. Behind them, Hawk could hear guards trying to follow, could hear Voss screaming orders. But the shaft was narrow, designed for single-file movement, and every guard who tried to enter got jammed up behind the one in front. They dropped 3 levels in 2 minutes. When they emerged, they were in a corridor Hawk recognized from the schematics directly adjacent to the quantum core chamber. The guards here hadn't received the alarm yet. They stood at relaxed attention, bored, not expecting trouble. Lyria disabled the first one with a strike to the nerve cluster in his neck. Hawk shot the second. The third tried to raise his weapon, but Lyria was faster. She broke his arm, took his rifle, and put him down with the butt to his helmet. The core chamber doors stood before them, massive and imposing. Through the bond, Hawk felt Lyria's determination solidify into diamond-hard resolve. This was it, their last gambit. Success meant seizing the most powerful warship in the Valkyrian fleet. Failure meant death for themselves and everyone they tried to protect. Ready, his hand found hers. Always. The band on her wrist blazed brighter than ever before. They placed their palms on the door's access panel. The bond surged, and the door recognized Lyria's biosignature. An Empress had access to every part of every Valkyrian vessel. The massive doors ground open. The Extinction's quantum core dwarfed Independent Station's reactor. It was a cathedral of power, a star contained and tamed and bent to the service of war. Energy arced between containment fields in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The hum it produced wasn't sound so much as pressure, a vibration that resonated in bone and blood. In the center, surrounded by quantum field generators that made reality shimmer like heat, haze, stood the neural interface. 2 pedestals just like before. "Waiting, James," Lyria's voice carried a tremor. "This is larger than the reactor. The power differential, I know." Hawk studied the readouts, his engineer's eye calculating the risks. "This could burn us out completely. Leave us vegetables even if we survive. Then we must not fail." They approached the interface. Behind them, Hawk could hear guards pounding on the door trying to override the lockout. They had maybe 90 seconds before Voss's forces breached the chamber. 90 seconds to sync with a quantum system powerful enough to run a warship that housed 2,000 people and mounted weapons capable of shattering planets. No pressure. Hawk took the left pedestal. Lyria took the right. The neural resonance band on her wrist had gone from violet to white, burning so bright it cast shadows across the chamber. Together. Lyria's hand found his one last time before they reached for the interface. Together, Hawk's fingers closed around the neural jack. Always together, they connected. The universe exploded. If the reactor sync had been overwhelming, this was obliterating. The sheer quantity of data that flooded into their minds should have killed them instantly. Navigation systems, weapons arrays, life support for 2,000 crew propulsion systems capable of faster-than-light travel, tactical databases containing 10,000 years of warfare. All of it trying to cram itself into 2 organic brains that had never been designed to handle such input. But they weren't 2 minds anymore. Through the sync, through the desperate fusion of consciousness that had begun in the reactor chamber and had only grown stronger since Hawk and Lyria had become something more. A hybrid intelligence, human intuition merged with a Valkyrian logic, military training, combined with strategic genius, desperation married to determination. The core tried to drown them. They drank deep and kept drinking. Hawk felt his consciousness expand to fill the ship. He was the hull, the shields, the weapons. He could feel every crew member's heartbeat, sense every system's power draw, understand every subsystem's interconnection. Lyria's presence flowed beside his, her understanding of Valkyrian technology, guiding his human adaptability. Together they seized control. The chamber doors blew open. Voss strode through with 50 soldiers at his back, his blade drawn and burning with killing intent. "Stop!" His voice was thunder. "Disconnect them now before too late." The ship's automated defenses came online. Turrets that had been dormant suddenly tracked to Voss's soldiers. Energy weapons that answered only to the ship's captain, a position that technically belonged to the Empress, swiveled and locked on target. "Stand down." Hawk's voice came not from his body still locked in the interface trance, but from every speaker in the chamber in the corridor throughout the entire ship. This vessel is now under the command of Empress Lyria Valen and her bonded mate. By order of the Crown, all personnel are to cease hostile action immediately. Voss stared at the pedestals at the two figures locked in communion with the ship's heart. His face cycled through shock rage and something that might have been grudging respect. "Thou hast taken my ship." His voice was quiet now, all bluster gone. "But thou canst not hold it. My crew will never follow a bonded empress and her human. Your crew will follow me." Lyria's voice joined Hawk's, the two of them speaking in perfect synchronization through the ship's systems. "Because I am their rightful sovereign, because I command the most powerful vessel in the fleet, and because the alternative is mutiny, a crime punishable by death under Valkyrian law." Throughout the extinction, crew members heard their Empress's voice, heard her command, felt the ship itself respond to her will. KL's loyalists moved quickly, securing key positions before anyone could organize resistance. Engineering, weapons, life support. The bridge. In the core chamber, Voss stood alone. His soldiers had lowered their weapons, recognizing the futility of fighting both their Empress and the ship itself. "You've lost, Marshal." Hawk's body remained locked in the interface, but his consciousness was everywhere. "Your coup is over. Your fleet stands down, or they face the extinction's weapons. Your choice." Voss's blade clattered to the deck. 4 centuries of life, of battle, of victory after victory, had led him to this moment. Defeated not by superior force, but by something he'd never anticipated. 2 beings who loved each other enough to become one. "I am the survivor of the Purge Wars." His voice carried exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "I watched 3 allied civilizations tear themselves apart through integration. Watched genetic drift destroy cultural identity. Watched strength become weakness because we forgot what made us strong." He met the blank gazes of Hawk and Lyria, still lost in their communion with the ship. "I sought to prevent the same fate for Valkyria." By starting a war, Hawk's consciousness pulled back slightly from the ship's systems, focusing on the old warrior before them. By murdering innocents, by preserving what matters. Voss sat heavily on the deck, suddenly looking every one of his 400 years. "But perhaps I have lived too long. Perhaps the galaxy has moved beyond warriors like me. The galaxy doesn't need warriors like you." Lyria's voice softened despite everything. "It needs builders, teachers, people willing to guide the next generation towards something better than endless war. I do not know how to be those things." "Then learn." Hawk felt the bond with Lyria pulsing, felt their shared consciousness beginning to separate as they prepared to disconnect from the core. "You have centuries left. Spend them building instead of burning." Voss looked up at them, and for the first time his eyes held something other than cold certainty. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of hope. "If I surrender, if I order my fleet to stand down, will thou grant me trial under Valkyrian law?" "You'll get a trial." Lyria's consciousness began withdrawing from the ship's systems, pulling back into her body. A fair one, with real judges, not a kangaroo court designed to justify execution. "Then I surrender." Voss placed both hands flat on the deck, a Valkyrian gesture of submission. "My fleet is yours, Empress. My life is yours. Do with both as justice demands." Hawk and Lyria disconnected from the interface simultaneously. The return to individual consciousness hit like a freight train, all that expanded awareness collapsing back into a single skull, a single body. Hawk's knees buckled. Lyria caught him and they held each other as the room spun. Through the bond, they could feel each other's exhaustion, their overwhelming relief, their shared disbelief that they'd actually survived. Around them, KL's loyalists were securing Voss, disarming his guards, taking control of the ship. The Grand Marshal didn't resist. He simply knelt, hands on the deck, waiting for judgment. "We did it." Lyria's voice was barely a whisper. "We actually did it." "Yeah." Hawk's laugh came out slightly hysterical. Somehow, against all odds and common sense, we pulled it off. Through the ship's internal sensors still dimly accessible through the fading connection to the quantum core, Hawk felt the extinction's weapons powering down. Felt Voss's fleet receiving orders to stand down. Felt the moment when two species stepped back from the brink of war. It was done. The medical bay aboard Independence Station had been rebuilt after the sabotage, its systems upgraded with a mix of human and Valkyrian technology. The treaty that had nearly died in fire and blood had been signed 3 days after the crisis ended, and in the months since both civilizations had begun the slow, difficult work of learning to coexist. Hawk woke slowly, consciousness returning like a tide coming in. The first thing he felt was pain, a dull ache that suffused his entire body. The second thing he felt was the bone pulsing warm and steady. Lyria was near, his eyes opened. The ceiling above him was white sterile, marked with the clean lines of military medical facilities. Monitors beeped softly. An IV drip fed something into his arm, probably antibiotics, possibly Valkyrian healing compounds, that the doctors had assured him were compatible with human biology. James, Lyria's voice, and then her face leaning into his field of vision. Her eyes were red from crying or exhaustion or both. Thou art awake. How long? His voice came out as a croak. 17 days. Thou hast been in a medically induced coma. The sync with the extinction nearly killed thee. She took his hand and the bond flared brighter. The doctors said thy neural pathways were overloaded, that thy brain needed time to heal. She brought his hand to her cheek. I refuse to leave thy side. 17 days. Hawk's mind struggled to process. What happened, Voss? The fleet all settled. Kale now commands the military forces, both Valkyrian and the joint human-Valkyrian units we are building. Voss is awaiting trial on Valkyra Prime. Draven was sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in the coup. Her smile carried relief and exhaustion in equal measure. The treaty is signed. Both our peoples are cooperating. It is fragile, new, but real. And you, Hawk, studied her face, noting the lines of stress, the weight she'd been carrying. How are you holding up? Better now that thou art awake. She pressed her forehead to his. I was afraid. The bond told me thou lived, but seeing thee unconscious, unresponsive. Her voice caught. I have only just found thee. I am not prepared to lose thee. Not going anywhere. Hawk squeezed her hand. I'm too stubborn to die, remember I, so thou hast proven. She pulled back slightly and he saw something in her expression. Nervousness, no, something else. Something that looked almost like worry mixed with trepidation. James, there is something I must tell thee. The way she said it made his heart skip. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong. She took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. Everything is unexpectedly right. For a moment, Hawk didn't understand. Then he felt it through the bond, through their connection, through the resonance that had been growing stronger every day since they first synced. A second heartbeat, faint but unmistakable, pulsing in time with the neural resonance band on Lyria's wrist. That's... His voice failed. That's impossible. The doctors said the same thing. Lyria's smile was tremulous. Human Valkyrian hybridization should not be possible. Our biochemistries are too different, our genetic structures incompatible. But the bond, she touched the glowing band. The bond changed something. When we synced with the quantum cores, when we merged our consciousness so completely, it altered us on a cellular level, made impossible things possible. We're having a child. Hawk's hand trembled against her abdomen. A baby. Due in approximately 6 of thy months. The doctors cannot predict what traits the child will inherit, what abilities it might possess. She met his eyes. But they assure me both the child and I are healthy. Hawk's vision blurred. After Marcus died, after his wife passed, he'd convinced himself that part of his life was over, that he was too old, too broken, too defined by his failures to be anyone's father again. And now, Marcus. The name came out choked. If it's a boy, can we name him Marcus? After thy son, Lyria's eyes shone. I would be honored. And if a girl, Hope. Hawk pulled her close, feeling tears he hadn't shed in 15 years, finally breaking free. We'll call her Hope. They stayed like that for a long time, two beings from different worlds holding each other while their impossible child grew between them. Outside the medical bay, the station bustled with activity, humans and Valkyrians working side by side, learning each other's languages and customs, building something new from the ashes of old hatreds. Eventually, Kyle arrived, still wearing his commander's armor, but with his helmet tucked under one arm. Brother, sister, he nodded to each in turn. The doctor said thou hadst awakened James. It is good to see thee alert. Good to be alert. Hawk managed a weak smile. How's the peace holding fragile? There are incidents, daily cultural misunderstandings, old prejudices resurfacing. Kale's expression was grim. But we are managing. The joint training programs help. When humans and Valkyrians learn to fight together, they learn to trust together. And the trial Lyria asked, Voss scheduled to begin next month. Public transparent by Valkyrian law. He will have competent representation and a jury of his peers. Kale's voice softened. He has been cooperative, has begun writing his memoirs documenting the Purge Wars so that future generations might learn from past mistakes. That's something. Hawk felt exhaustion pulling at him, despite the 17 days' sleep. Kale, I need to ask, how are you doing with all this? The bond and the baby, the changes. Kale was quiet for a moment. I will not claim to understand all of it. The bond remains strange to me, seeing my sister share thoughts with another, as she once shared only with me. But, he met Hawk's eyes. But I see her happy. Truly happy, perhaps, for the first time since our parents died. And that is worth any discomfort on my part. Thank you. Hawk extended his hand again, that human gesture of respect that Kyle was beginning to understand. For accepting us, for standing with us. Thou art family now. Kyle clasped his hand firmly. And family stands together, even when it is difficult, even when the galaxy seems determined to tear us apart. A nurse human this time poked her head into the room. Apologies for the interruption, but there's a ceremony scheduled in the main hall. Colonel Hawkins, if you're feeling up to it. What ceremony? Hawk looked to Lyria for explanation. A surprise. Her smile held mischief. Can thou walk with help? Hawk let her and Kale support him as he climbed out of the medical bed. His legs felt like rubber, his body weak from nearly 3 weeks of inactivity. But the bond gave him strength, Lyria's vitality flowing through their connection, shoring up his depleted reserves. They made their way through the station's corridors past crew members who stopped to salute or bow, depending on their species. Word of Hawk's role in preventing the war had spread through both human and Valkyrian populations. He'd become something of a legend, the old soldier who bonded with an empress and saved 2 civilizations. He'd preferred being anonymous maintenance chief, but that life was gone now, burned away in reactor fire and quantum communion. The main hall had been decorated for the occasion, banners showing both Earth and Volcara human and Valkyrian flags intertwined. The crowd that filled the space was mixed, hundreds of people from both species waiting expectantly. At the front, Captain Martinez stood at attention in her full-dress uniform. Beside her, a delegation from the U.S. Space Force and another from the Valkyrian High Council. What is this? Hawk whispered to Lyria. Justice. She guided him to the front of the hall. In recognition. Captain Martinez stepped forward, her voice carrying across the space with military precision. Colonel James Hawkins, for 17 years you served Independence Station as maintenance chief. For 47 years before that, you served the United States military with distinction. She opened a small case revealing a medal. Hawk recognized immediately the Distinguished Service is cross, one of the highest military honors. Your actions 3 months ago prevented war between 2 species, saved 10,000 lives aboard this station, and embodied the highest traditions of military service. By order of the President of the United States and with the full support of the Valkyrian Empire, you are hereby restored to active duty with the rank of colonel and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. The crowd erupted in applause. Hawk stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Restored to active duty, after 15 years additionally. Martinez continued, her voice rising over the applause. The Valkyrian High Council has voted to grant you honorary citizenship in the Valkyrian Empire and the rank of Lord Consort to Empress Lyria Valen. You are now recognized as the first human to hold dual citizenship and the first human to be formally bonded to Valkyrian royalty. A Valkyrian official stepped forward, placing a second medal on Hawk's chest, this one a crystalline star that caught the light and refracted it in impossible patterns. This is the star of unity newly created for this occasion. Thou art the first recipient. May there be many more. Hawk looked to Lyria, saw her smiling through tears. You planned this. Thou didst earn it. She took his hand. Thy service, thy sacrifice, thy refusal to give up even when all seemed lost. The galaxy should know what thou hast done. I'm 68 years old. Hawk's voice was thick with emotion. I'm going to be a father again. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. Thou hast spent thy entire life preparing for this. Lyria's voice was fierce. Thou hast survived war-loss guilt that would have broken lesser beings. Thou hast learned from thy failures and found strength in thy weaknesses. She touched the glowing band. And thou hast loved me despite every reason not to, because of every reason to. Hawk pulled her close, ignoring the watching crowd. You saved me, Lyria. Not just my life, but everything that makes life worth living. We saved each other. She kissed him, and the bond between them blazed bright enough to be visible even to those without neural links. The crowd cheered again, humans and Valkyrians celebrating together the union that symbolized their newfound alliance. When they finally pulled apart, Captain Martinez was smiling. Sir, there's one more thing. She gestured to a screen that flickered to life, showing a familiar face. Admiral Chen, U.S. Space Force, speaking from Earth. Sir, the President has asked me to offer you a position, Chief Liaison Officer for Human-Valkyrian Relations. It would involve coordinating between our species, facilitating the cultural exchange programs, and generally doing what you've already been doing, making sure we don't screw this up. Hawk laughed despite himself. That's a fancy title for keep humans and Valkyrians from killing each other. It's an important job. Admiral Chen's expression was serious. And you're the only person both species trust to do it right. What do you say? Colonel Hawk looked at Lyria, felt her support through the bond, looked at KL, saw his brother-in-law's approving nod, looked at the crowd of humans and Valkyrians waiting for his answer. I say. He straightened despite his exhaustion, despite the pain, despite the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like armor. I say it would be my honor to serve. The crowd erupted. The ceremony continued, speeches, presentations, celebrations that blurred together in Hawk's memory. But through it all, he felt the bond with Lyria, felt the impossible heartbeat of their child, felt the future opening before them like a door into starlight. He'd been a soldier, a husband, a father, a failure, a survivor. Now he was something new, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of impossible hope, a man who'd been given a second chance when he'd long since given up expecting one. And he would not waste it. The nursery aboard the diplomatic vessel, now renamed Unity in honor of the peace it had helped forge, had been designed by both human and Valkyrian engineers. The result was a strange but beautiful blend of styles, soft curves mixed with crystalline angles, warm lighting that could shift to cool at the touch of a button, walls that could display images from both Earth and Volterra. Hawk stood at the viewport, watching both planets visible in the same sky, Earth blue and familiar, Volterra violet and alien. His hand rested on Lyria's swollen belly, feeling the child move within. Strong kicks, he smiled. Definitely got your strength, or thy stubbornness. Lyria leaned against him, exhausted from the pregnancy, but glowing with contentment. The doctors say any day now, and they still can't predict what the baby will be like. They have theories. Hybrid vigor, enhanced abilities, possibly even limited neural connectivity beyond the bond. She turned to face him. But in truth, no one knows. Our child will be the first of its kind. Scary thought. Hawk's hand moved to the small of her back, supporting her weight. We're going to make so many mistakes. All parents do. Lyria's smile was gentle. But we will make them together, and we will learn as we have learned everything else. Movement at the door. Kael entered carrying an armful of gifts from various dignitaries. More presents for the child who will unite two worlds. His tone was dry. At this rate, the baby will have more toys than the treasury has credits. Return the expensive ones. Hawk took the packages and set them aside. What our kid needs is love and guidance, not gold-plated rattles from politicians trying to curry favor. Wise words. Kael's expression softened. Thou wilt be a good father, James. I'll try. Hawk thought of Marcus, of all the things he'd done right and wrong as a parent. This time will be different. This time I won't be deploying to war zones every 6 months. This time I'll be here. We will both be here. Lyria's hand found his. raising this child together, teaching them about both our peoples. They will grow up knowing human courage and Valkyrian honor, Earth's creativity and Valkyra's discipline, and they'll be loved. Hawk felt the bond pulse between them. That's what matters most. Lyria gasped suddenly, her hand tightening on his. James, I think the time has come. Now Hawk's training kicked in despite his panic. Okay, okay. KL, alert the medical team. I'll get her to... She was already moving determination, overriding pain. The baby comes when the baby comes. Let us not keep them waiting. The next 8 hours were a blur of medical jargon. Lyria's incredible strength as she endured pain that would have killed most beings, Hawk's hand crushed in her grip as he whispered encouragement. KL paced outside the medical bay like a caged tiger. Human and Valkyrian doctors worked together, monitoring systems both biological and technological, prepared for any complications. There were none. At 0342 station time, with both planets visible through the medical bay's viewport, the child was born. The baby's first cry was loud, healthy, furious at being pulled from warm darkness into cold light. The doctor, a human woman with 30 years of obstetrics experience, held the infant up with trembling hands. It's a girl. Her voice was awed. A healthy girl. Hawk couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The child had Lyria's violet skin but his darker hair. Her eyes, when they opened, were a blend violet shot through with human brown, creating a color that had no name. She was small, perfect, impossible. Hope. Lyria's voice was exhausted but full of wonder. Our hope. They placed the baby in Hawk's arms. She weighed nothing, weighed everything. His daughter, Marcus's sister, though she'd never meet him. The first child of two species, the living symbol of a peace that had seemed impossible mere months ago. Hello, Hope, his voice broke. I'm your dad, and I promise you I'm going to be here. For every birthday, every scraped knee, every triumph and failure. You'll never wonder if I love you because I'll show you every single day. The baby yawned, tiny fist waving in the air. And then impossibly, the neural resonance band on Lyria's wrist began to pulse in a new rhythm. Not the steady beat of the bond between Hawk and Lyria, but something else. A third note in the symphony. The doctors stared. Kale, who'd entered when the baby was born, froze mid-step. Is that? Lyria's voice was barely a whisper. Is she bonding with us? The baby's hand, impossibly small, reached toward the glowing band. Her fingers brushed it, and suddenly Hawk felt a new presence in the bond. Not fully formed, not complex like his connection with Lyria, but real. His daughter's consciousness pure and new, and absolutely fearless. She carries the bond. The Valkyrian doctor's voice held reverence. Not just compatible with it, but born already connected. This is unprecedented. This is the future. Hawk looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the brother-in-law who'd become family. A future where the line between human and Valkyrian blurs. Where impossible things become possible. Where an old soldier can find redemption, and an empress can find love, and a baby can be born already carrying the seeds of peace. Hope yawned again and closed her eyes, content in her father's arms. Through the Mondine, Hawk felt her contentment, her absolute trust, her certainty that she was safe and loved and home. Outside the viewport, Earth and Valkyra hung together in the black. Two worlds, once strangers, now bound by something stronger than treaties or trade agreements. Bound by a child who carried the best of both species, who would grow up knowing that different didn't mean enemy, that change didn't mean destruction, that the future didn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Hawk held his daughter close and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, Marcus was watching. His mother, too. And they were proud. I did it. The thought was a prayer, a promise, a plea. I finally did something right. Through the Lyria's love enveloped him. Through the new fragile connection, Hope's trust anchored him. And for the first time in 40 years, James Hawk Hawkins felt the weight of his failures lift. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a father, a husband, a bridge between worlds. He was home.